One of the most influential emulators was ZSNES, a Super NES emulator that was undoubtedly ahead of its time and paved the way for modern emulation as we know it today. We've covered it on the channel before, of course, talking about the many groundbreaking firsts that it brought to emulation, and of course its blistering speed on low-end PCs at the time. And today is a good day because I come with some big news for all emulation fans. After 17 years since the last release of ZSNES, the original development team, zsKnight and Demo, are once again collaborating together and have been working on a modern update of ZSNES from the top down. This is Super ZSNES, and I'm really excited to be talking about it today with you on the channel. Super ZSNES hopes to reimagine how we think about modern Super Nintendo emulation, which to be honest is nigh on perfect these days with many advanced features and quality of life enhancements. But Super ZSNES brings modern enhancements never seen before to 16-bit tile-based emulation. At a click of a checkbox on the very familiar UI, games can be enhanced in the following ways. Textures can have materials applied to them. 16:9 widescreen can be enabled with an optional border, as many game sprites will clip outside the 8:7 viewport. High-res can add up to 4x the pixel resolution of any tile or sprite in the game, and audio can be enhanced, all at the click of a button. This doesn't require any reverse engineering skills. These enhancements can be built with modding tools that we're going to go into some more detail about. And of course, if you prefer, you can just keep things stock as they were intended. And of course, the emulator includes save states, rewind, cheat codes, button mappings, as you'd come to expect. And yes, the most important thing of all, the snow effect is back. And Super ZSNES is still very much in early development, but I am happy to report Super ZSNES is available on Windows, Mac, Android, with iOS coming soon. My Odin 3 has been getting a workout lately, playing many hours of Super ZSNES, and I gotta tell you guys, I haven't been as excited as I am right now with this level of advancement in Super Nintendo emulation for a very long time. Now, of course, many of you probably have questions about this revival and how it came to be, so let's get right into it. The initial motivation for the revival of both the original development team and the return of Super Nintendo emulation development was for zsKnight, an interview that he did with Zophar from Zophar's Domain about the positive times and memories working on the project and the fan reception surrounding it. But this new revival wouldn't just be picking up where ZSNES left off. Instead, zsKnight envisaged himself working on an all-new version. He would tell me, "I had to brainstorm a bit, thinking what I could do differently. So I started out by writing a GPU renderer that replaces a large chunk of the SNES PPU emulation, with rendering done mostly on the GPU through shaders. Doing this was quite the challenge, with the SNES being CRT based and GPU being geometry based, but it turns out that it was a pretty fun challenge." Super ZSNES is a ground-up complete reimagining of the original ZSNES emulator that, while retains a very familiar UI, comes with some modern features. But this is just the beginning. Super ZSNES is a much more modern effort, and the team hopes that it can garner just as much excitement and popularity as the original did all those years ago. Historically, Super NES emulation is 99% performed on the CPU. The GPU, generally speaking, has little to do other than rendering to textures and post-processing shaders such as CRT filters that you see on modern emulators. Super ZSNES changes this approach and turns that on its head, and makes heavy use of the GPU to generate its visuals. In short, Super ZSNES does much of the work on the GPU, including palette lookups, tile rendering, transparencies, Mode 7, color math, main and sub screen combinations, mosaic effects, are all handled via GPU shaders. Of course, I was curious, and I was able to confirm this just by capturing a few frames in RenderDoc and taking a look at the rendering pipeline, and as sure as day, it's using the GPU as advertised. Now you might be thinking to yourself, why is this even a big deal? I mean, most emulators, we don't really care where they run, if they're on the CPU or on the GPU. At the end of the day, it's about having a great emulation experience. Well, the interesting part about this approach is it does allow for some interesting enhancements at the press of a button, just like this. Things such as high-res textures, normal mapping, and even 3D over Mode 7 are all possible. And I want to be very clear here, this is not some super old school Super Eagle filter. These are specifically built GPU rendering techniques for different features that the Super NES provides. Let's take for example Mode 7. Mode 7, as we know, is not real 3D. We know that it's 2D hardware scaling and rotation, and it simulates 3D by changing values line by line using HDMA. Super ZSNES handles Mode 7 in two unique ways. The first is rendering the entire Mode 7 tile map into a single texture, and that texture is remapped line by line to produce the Mode 7 effect using shaders. You can see here as clear as day with a render doc pass that this is exactly what's happening. The second is still early work in progress, and it replaces Mode 7 backgrounds with a perspective camera view. And this of course opens up the possibility of 3D replacement in some Mode 7 games. Take for example this capture of F-Zero. You can see that there are height maps associated with the edge of the course. And the team is hard at work providing enhancements to visuals in some titles. Now these are all selectable at the press of a button. So you can either keep things as old school, of course, and keep things as stock as you want to, which is all perfectly integer scaled in its pixelated glory, or at the press of a button, you can enhance the visuals of your games. We can now see materials being applied to some of the surfaces. And I do want to stress, this is just an example of some of the enhancements that are possible. Now, of course, these enhancements that you see don't come for free. They must be developed by someone. And of course, modders that are watching this are probably getting excited to hear more about this. The Super ZSNES team has built their own enhancement editor to construct and provide these high-res mods per game. And this is a demonstration of the enhancement editor. This currently is in private development and private beta, but the goal is to make it user-friendly as possible and release it to the public. However, I do stress there is no current ETA on that, but in general, what it does allow for the modder to use different brush sizes, zoom, draw boxes, pixels, lines, upscale, import, and even the ability to draw over individual Super NES background layers. Corners can be rounded, sharpened, all by hand using the tool. The first release of Super ZSNES will come with 7 games out of the box that have these enhancements provided at a toggle of a button. But as the tool improves, more games will be supported, and the plan is to open up this editor to the public. Now, when I did speak to zsKnight, he did state the reason why it's not for public use yet is because it's still highly work in progress. He goes on to say, as soon as it's released to the public, work needs to be done to ensure that any changes that are made to the enhancement engine editor are fully backward compatible with older user-generated data. But as we can see, some of the early examples of the enhancement engine editor are already looking very, very good. I'm personally getting excited at the possibility of an enhancement to a game such as Chrono Trigger, where I never felt like a modern remake or an HD 2D remake was going to be anywhere near as good as the original. With something like this, we can handcraft a exceptional mod to the game that really breathes new life into one of the best ever games ever made. And there's so many classic Super NES games that there's going to be a lot of people that are very interested in this particular tool. But I asked more about the rendering pipeline and exactly how it works. zsKnight mentioned that they use what is known as game profiles, and it's a fascinating insight. When a game is played, there are various detection methods used to be able to swap in high-res textures. Those detection methods are applied using data hashes, and the replacement asset data can either be hand-drawn art or royalty-free assets without storing any direct ROM in the Super ZSNES binary itself. Conversion from low-res to high-res textures is based on UV remapping, and the enhancement editor uses an edit mode that allows the developers to up-res and draw over the original Super NES graphics and then generate UV mapping data at 4x the base resolution. It then combines the high-res UV remapping data with the original SNES data along with the palette data. A fragment shader would sample these textures based on the UV data of the generated mesh, which corresponds to the tiles drawn on screen. And according to zsKnight, so how it works is that the original SNES data is processed into its own low-resolution lookup texture. The palette itself is also generated into an additional palette lookup texture or multiple palette textures if palettes are changed in the middle of the screen, and then finally combined with the UV remap texture, which is currently generated from the mod data. These textures are passed onto the shader to generate the final high-resolution data in real time. As for 3D over Mode 7, He said that the editor allows for a height map to be drawn over the tiles, which is then used to make the track edges in F-Zero look 3D. The polygon budget is really dependent on how detailed we want to make the scene, but it's kept as low to monitor performance. He also says that once the tech matures, it could be copied over and used in 2D modes as well, which is quite interesting to think about. But it's not just the graphics. The audio can also be enhanced. Take a listen for yourself. And this is what it sounds like with the audio enhancement enabled. The functionality replaces BRR samples with uncompressed high sample rate equivalents, and it all goes through the same audio post-processing and ADSR timing of the Super NES. The functionality revolves around a simple detection, replacement, and post-filtering options. In order to replace samples, similar sounding samples are found, and they're either replaced or mixed in with the original samples. The internal enhancement editor that we talked about also has some tools for the audio side to provide things like pitch matching, volume adjustment, and loop correct audio cues. The challenge right now, he says, is to find proper sample replacements, especially for the FM style audio, which we currently don't have access to good sample data, but he's hoping that the community can step in and help them out. Now, of course, if you're not really interested in enhancements, you can leave all those things turned off and just play Super Nintendo games as you normally would. And the emulator comes with the usual assortment of features, such as save states, rewind, cheat code support, and of course by pressing the escape button, you're into the classic ZSNES style emulation user interface that will be very familiar to you if you used ZSNES back in the day. It's easy just to build another Super Nintendo emulator out there, but that's already been done, and there's some really great ones as we know, such as Messen, BSNES, and RS, all providing accurate, near 100% emulation quality. And I think Demo and zsKnight are taking the right approach in that it's not really worth the time and investment to just build another Super Nintendo emulator, because there's really great ones out there. But coming to the table with a different take on Super Nintendo emulation and providing tools to enhance games without requiring heavy reverse engineering could be somewhat of a game changer when it comes to 16-bit emulation. Now, there were a few other things that I asked about that I got some clarification on. Super ZSNES is a Unity-based app, which is interesting to consider as the majority of emulators out there are of course custom developed. And I did have some concerns about things like audio delay and input delay, and to be completely honest, I wouldn't have even known that it was a Unity app until I looked closer at the files in the distribution. And because Super ZSNES is reliant heavily on the GPU, you do need somewhat of a decent CPU and GPU to run this emulator. Now, I wasn't specifically told what type of specification, but zsKnight tells me that their to-do list contains a ton of optimization work, and judging by their past efforts, I think we are in good hands. The last comment I wanted to bring up is actually from zsKnight, when I asked him about the lasting legacy of ZSNES and a message for longtime fans. He would go on to say, "I'm honestly very, very touched by the reception. Now, after 20 years, I'm finally back at it. I'm not sure how this new one will be received due to the amount of time that has passed, especially with all those great new amazing developments that have happened in the emulation scene. But if it's something that our community enjoys, I hope that they can help us out by joining our Patreon. I do have this dream in mind where I can start working on stuff like this full time, but that will only be possible if I can get enough financial support. Any amount will help, as it will help me to transition at least to part-time with my work once my current contract ends. The challenge has always been trying to juggle my time to work full time, take care of my family, work on this, get enough rest, and of course, play some video games. It's an interesting development in my life, where this is what I started with and what helped kickstart my career. And now it might just be how my career will end. We'll see though. But no matter what happens, this just might be something that I'll keep committing to forward regardless of whether it becomes successful or not, because this is currently my passion. So we are going to leave it here for today's episode. This is a very exciting announcement. I will leave links to everything in the description below, including a link to the Super ZSNES Patreon if you want to support this initiative. And you should be hearing a lot more about Super ZSNES in the near future. But I do want to give a huge thanks to zsKnight and Demo for not only the revival of Super ZSNES, but also for entrusting me with taking a look at the emulator and asking questions about how the technology works. I think this is very, very exciting stuff, and you'll definitely be hearing more about Super ZSNES in the future. We're going to leave it here for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and we will catch you guys in the next episode. Bye for now.